a minute. Yeah, keep me right there. Everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Sunshine, sunshine. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Yeah, but everybody, wait a minute. Yeah, keep me right there. Everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like live right here at Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Happy to be your host. Popping up again. I appreciate you for joining us, those who are here live, and for those who will see and hear this later, appreciate you as well. Shout out to Warrior Class. Didn't, had no problem waiting. Appreciate you. And I need to go back and catch the beginning of it because I've been missing a lot of stuff lately because I have been 2 weeks to deadline. 2 weeks from today, I believe it is my deadline for the second edition of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, MOBP, and came across a couple of things and a recent interview or segment I participated in for Press TV just came out regarding the ADL and the Black liberation struggle. So I want to blend a little bit of these two things here for a relatively short piece, but welcome to those who are here. Good to see you. Thanks. Yeah, the pressure is on and I do feel it. But I will say that one of the things that eases the pressure is that I'm reminded that the book isn't meant to make all of my arguments about everything, and that I have this platform. I'm very happy to have this platform and outlet to cover a lot that I won't be able to do in the book. So the I mix what I like here is a nice supplement to that work. Um, which I'm going to talk a little bit about that too, because I have some notes about some shows specific to supplementing the book that I'd like to do. Uh, Peace, Baba Balagoon. Good to see you. Thank you very much for coming through. So I want to get to some stuff about the ADL in class in just a minute. I want to start with this a little bit here on buying power because it's relatively simple, and there were just two examples. I've just been looking at some updated use. So one of the updates to the book is on the chapter on the modern day purveyors, and in the first edition, I focus mostly on the Selig Center and Nielsen. But I've had to, and I'm working on adding some additional commentary on McKinsey and Company, who have quickly become one of the major purveyors of the myth of buying power. And essentially, as I'll be explaining, they all use more or less the same flawed approach, because none of them are trying to assess the actual condition of Black people economically. They're only trying to assess how Black consumers spend money so that they can help redirect ad revenue to specifically target those communities. So it is not reflective of income, wealth, or economic strength. I know this sounds for some of you and for me for repetitive, but the myth keeps coming up. So as I talked a little bit about in the Ludacris video the other day, here are a couple other examples that I've found because I've been trying to update the reference to those three modern purveyors of the myth, that is Selig, Nielsen, and McKinsey. And I'm trying to assess, just update a little bit. So I don't know that any of this will be included per se as references in the book, but I came across a couple of interesting things and that I thought I would share. And big shout out to, again, being underpaid as an academic is a problem. But one of the things I do enjoy is access to some of these research engines, even as Morgan has unfortunately felt the need to cut back on some of those anyway. But so this is a piece I found recently that came out in the last calendar year, that is during 2022, and is actually, I thought was interesting, a piece published by my I'd rather do it. Well, no, let me go back. My my Morgan State colleague working at WEAA at Morgan State University. And I will show you here. Let's see where this was published. This was in the Afro-American. Okay, so this was in the Afro-American, titled publication title. All right, so the title is Black Bodies Have Always Mattered by Kay Whitehead, who hosts a popular radio show on WEAA. And it's more or less a quick reflection on, and actually it was, I think this is it's a Black History Month piece. So it's just a quick piece in the Afro-American Black newspaper. Again, this is part of the problem, that the Black press promotes this mythology because the Black press wants to encourage white ad buyers to spend with the Black press, because the Black press, wants that money. But it does not help when it comes to promoting an accurate understanding to Black audiences of the economy. No, it's not going to work. of the economy and how it works. So anyway, so as Kay Whitehead is just talking about. By the way, I've never been invited to Kay's show. I do remember there were rumors, I think well substantiated rumors of the former dean encouraging, who brought her in to WEAA, the former dean of the College of Journalism, who, as I've shared here a little bit about, was not a fan of your boy. There was a rumor that because Kay came in as part of the purge of a number of people from WEAA who were not seen as being compliant or part of the new mission or whatever. And since that took place, I've never been invited back to WEAA or to Kay's show. And I think that, you know, maybe she might want to reconsider that, or at least check my work. Anyway, so as she's talking about what Black people, she's making the point that Black bodies have always mattered. And that as she mentions here, the sale of Black people has always meant something of value to the economy. And then she notes that in 2019, according to the Selig Center for Economic Growth, Black buying power was $1.4 trillion, which is higher than the gross domestic product of Mexico. It is projected to grow to 1.8 trillion by 2024. I'm not entirely clear what she's advocating as a result, like in terms of that, but because the next line is, at the same time, we have the lowest rates in home ownership, life insurance, college savings plans, and retirement accounts. We are outpaced in our wages by our white and Asian counterparts with the same skills and experience. Black History Month, which is supposed to be a time of reflection for what we have been through and pride for what we have overcome, has been transformed into a capitalist hodgepodge of I have a dream mattress sale and we shall overcome designer tennis shoes. It is designed to confuse instead of giving us clarity that we need to understand, that we are descendants of survivors, and we are because they are. So anyway, I mean, as she notes the systemic racism and its impact, allowing for white and Asians to be paid more than Black people, she seems to suggest that Black people are caught up in capitalist sales as opposed to the more appropriate, financially literate practices of home ownership, life insurance, college savings plans, and retirement accounts. Ultimately, my point for this work is that it doesn't matter if she and I agree on the broader political ideological point, or what we could do about the economy, or what we should do. But the point just simply is, here again is the myth being retold with that same source, the Selig Center, unquestioned in its methodology. No reference to the fact that I have already, 2 years before this publication came out, formerly working right around the corner from that studio where Kay produces her show, had already proven that Selig's methodology is flawed and has nothing to do with assessing Black economic condition, and have already shown that the myth of buying power is mythological. And yet here again, having not been invited to discuss this work in the pages of the Afro or on Kay's show, we see the two have conspired in a way to reproduce the mythology and falsely help construct the same mythology she's lamenting in the very next sentence or so. So part of the confusion about, and one of the reasons why Dr. King's dream has been turned into a capitalist hodgepodge, as she says, or Black History Month rather has been turned into a capitalist hodgepodge, is because of the persistent mythology around the economy and Black people's relationship to it, and particularly this issue of buying power. So anyway, so that was just one example. I'll share you with just one more. I don't want to belabor the point. And the piece on the ADL is going to take a little bit of time, and I don't have that much time today. I'm kind of rushing to stick this in a little bit. By the way, a number of you asked if I would do a live tomorrow for the World Cup, and won't be able to do that. I'm going to spend that time in watching it with my youngest daughter, and just the two of us, and we're just going to focus on the game and in our each other's company. That was in part her request, but I think also I recognize that's probably my preferred way of doing it too. As much as I enjoy lives and sharing stuff with you all, this is going to be some time with baby girl. And anyway, so maybe later on we can come on and do a post game thing. I don't know, but we'll see. But anyway, but let me just pull this one other example up here, and I've mentioned him before. In fact, I think he's mentioned in the first edition because he has purported this myth on a number of occasions, and including for a while on the Roland Martin show. I don't know if he's still there, but that's Michael Cord writing for we'll see in a minute, but one of the papers in Philadelphia. And this was also in 2022, I believe in January of 2022. Blacks in 2021 had lots of dollars, but little sense. So already just out the gate, he's doing what I not only is he wrong, but it's just this whole approach I really am not a fan of. This whole idea that I'm going to tell Black people how dumb they are, and that's going to motivate them to do better. But as Michael Cord foolishly, unfortunately, it just has a lot of time here, because apparently, as he says here, this is volume 9 of a monthly column entitled Black Dollars. Black Dollars Matter. So I have not read all 9 editions, and they apparently took place before this calendar year. My search was just in this last calendar year, which is why this is in January. He's talking about 2021. And but that's fine, because he does enough here to demonstrate that all 9 of his columns are at best misguided. As I point out each month, this column is generally designed to compel white businesses, entities in Philadelphia, and white employers in Philadelphia to treat Black consumers and Black applicants, employees, firms with respect. But more important, it is also designed to convince Black people in Philadelphia to do for self economically as well as politically, because in a capitalist democracy, money and politics talk, meaning persuade, and BS walks, meaning Dave's empty-handed. I'm not entirely sure if that's a misprint or what is meant there, but the whole what he's describing there is an entirely fraudulent construct. Capitalist democracy is sort of what is it, an oxymoron, or but it again misunderstands. So again, we always hear, a lot of times, at least very often, we hear a phrase similar to what Cord writes here, that in capitalism, money talks and BS walks. But that does not actually, while people think it's doing something metaphorically, it does not explain how capitalism works. In fact, it does everything to not explain how capitalism works. Because it suggests, so for instance, it doesn't say anything about how capitalism works to create inequality, to create imbalance, to create a permanent situation where one class has more money than someone else, than everyone else, and can permanently use that against the interests of everyone else. So this idea that if Black people just stop, again, as he's suggesting, even from the title, stop foolishly spending money and being ignorant with their money, they can somehow catch up or do better or lessen the violence of capitalism as an economic and social order, is just nonsense. He also, by the way, now this is what I think, now this may end up being how this gets written into that chapter in the second edition, because in the next line, and I haven't followed up yet, but in the next line, because I have covered this, I think he's misquoting and perhaps or not following up on. So he cites in the next line, he says, it's reported in Forbes in September 17, 2021. The 47.8 million African Americans in this country present businesses with a $300 billion opportunity. That line sounds like Forbes is referencing McKinsey. And what McKinsey was in fact saying was so later, as we'll see, Cord reduces black buying power to $300 billion. But Cord, in his again, I haven't gone so far to do this yet, and maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I'm confident in saying this, even without even with admitting that I have not taken the steps to prove it. I am confident that he's misreading previously reported data from McKinsey and others, but who are saying that the $300 billion opportunity was specific to either hirings in the entertainment industry or offerings in the entertainment industry, or something specific to one sector of the economy. It was not reflective of the total buying power the myth holds for black people. So I just think he's rushing and poorly. So I'm almost sure that Forbes story is citing McKinsey, and I'm almost sure he has misread the story. But even if he's reading it somehow correctly, he's again accepting the mythology and promoting more mythology. So as he says, again, citing the Selig Center, as you see in the very next line, which is again unchecked as a source. Nobody even bothers to review how I've shown their methodology to be flawed. Even if you want to tell me I've done it wrong, I would appreciate somebody doing that, because if you're going to keep referencing the Selig Center, it would be wonderful to see somebody tell me and demonstrate that they've actually read the reports from the Selig Center, that they see the methodology that the reports use. And again, as I show how they say that they're based on estimates and projections and have nothing to do with measurements of income or wealth. But just like Kay Whitehead did in the last one, the same nonsensical comparisons to GDP, the GDP of Mexico, as she said, and all that stuff is just, it just keeps coming up over and over and over again. And I can't help it. Look, I know it just feels like, with the proximity of some of these sources to me, both literally, geographically, and physically, in terms of Morgan State, or in this atmosphere of academic, intellectual punditry, journalist, like it's like it does feel a little bit willful in saying we're just not going to mess with Jared. We're not going to read his work. We're going to read it and ignore it. We're going to read it and misrepresent it. We're going to, something like that. I don't know. It's just wild. And if not, okay. But either way, I'm demonstrating how the myth continues to circulate. So again, referencing the Selig Center report, the combined buying power of U.S. consumers grew from 11.3 trillion to 17.5 trillion between 2010 and 2020. Which constitutes 55%. Over the same period, African Americans' buying power grew by 61%. So he says that is Cord. Wow, 310 billion, 61% buying power growth. That's a lot of dollars, but sadly, those holding it have little sense. Well, one, because Mr. Cord, you're continuing to misread the data. You even misread what you quote here by ignoring the fact that, as I showed in the first edition, and it looks like it's even worse now, 1 point whatever trillion in buying power for black people, or as Mr. Cord misrepresents here, for just only 300 billion, compared to 11.3 to 17.5 trillion for the entire country, shows how relatively powerless even this great amount of buying power it actually has. Even if you want to say that it's real and powerful, it pales in comparison, literally and pun intended, to what other consumers, white and others, have in society. So this idea that it can be used to close those gaps, when in and of itself is, as the differences are as disparate as they show there, is just patent nonsense. But his piece here is just a mess. I mean, then he starts quoting Malcolm X with this whole "what's the matter, we sick, boss," but nothing from Malcolm on socialism or capitalism as a problem. what I love best about this is that he goes down and starts acting like he's a historian here by talking about the importance of the black dollar and referencing the "Don't Buy Where You Can't Work" campaign, which I just discussed in the other day, from Abram Harris, is where Abram Harris, do I have it right here still? Yeah. Where Abram Harris in The Negro is Capitalist talks about how the "Don't Buy Where You Can't Work" campaign is just an update of the old entire Better Negro Business campaign, all to conclude, as he does, and I'll continue to read this because I think I'm ever more increasingly becoming this era or version of an Abram Harris, that the real forces behind the black poor, the disabilities of the black poor and discomfort are masked by race, which prevents them from seeing that what the Negro businessman wants of most of all is the freedom to monopolize and exploit the market they provide. So as Cord even started out his piece with, the goal of his is designed to compel white businesses to respect black consumers and applicants and firms. What does respect mean? Give them money. And what he's ultimately saying is, we have 300 billion to spend, which again, he's just off on so many levels. He's reducing the amount of buying power, which is itself fraudulent. So I mean, it's, but he says there are nearly 50 million black consumers in America, and we have 300 billion to spend. Once we finally get our minds right, we're going to sensibly spend most of those dollars on black businesses. So that's ultimately what he wants. He wants his black business, he's a lawyer and whatever else he's supporting, to make money. He wants to capture that 300 billion. So he's not talking about redistributing it. He's not talking about how it doesn't change the relationship between black people and the larger economy, because that 300 billion, as he reports, is nothing compared to the 17.5 trillion of the overall consumer base. And even if the $1.8 trillion number is reported accurately or whatever, it still pales in comparison. So it's just again, the myth just continues to circulate, and with zero advance in terms of updating, even investigating the reporting that the reports they claim to cite, et cetera, and so forth. So, all right, let's move on. Let me move on to this ADL piece, which I think is fascinating and really important. And then if I have time, I'll come back and check what I'm sure is a fascinating and vigorous chat. So don't go anywhere. Be right back.
I mix what I like.
All right, so I'll put a link in the description. I don't think I did it yet, but so I took part in a Press TV piece that came out, I think today or yesterday, that deals with the relationship between the ADL and Black liberation struggle. And if I can, I'm going to play just a clip from the video itself, and then I will so I'm going to have to do that again from, all right, so it's about the 43rd second. That's fine. That's fine.
For Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for an answer. This is not just a war over stolen land. Why do you think little boys are throwing stones at tanks? And we'll never really know how many people are dead. They drop bombs on innocent girls while they sleep in their bed. Israel is a terror state, they're terrorists that terrorize. I'll testify, my television televise, I'm telling lies. How many more resolutions have to be violated? How many more children have to be annihilated? This is not a war, it is systematic genocide. But whatever they try, Palestine will never die. Free, free Palestine, free, free Palestine, free, free Palestine, free, free Palestine.
Hello, I'm Chris Williamson, and this is Palestine Declassified, where we investigate the Israeli regime's global war against solidarity with the illegally occupied people of Palestine. The controversy over the recent remarks made by Kanye West and Kyrie Irving have shone a light on the Zionist movement's hostility towards the black community. In this week's show, we'll be examining the record of Zionist aggression against black and African American movements from the 1950s to the present day. I'll be talking to experts on this issue after this special report by Latifa Abu-Chakra on the shameful history of the Zionist movement's attacks on black leaders and movements.
The active use of the tropes about black anti-Semitism by Zionist groups in relation to recent controversies has a history. We trace the evolution of the anti-Arab and specifically anti-black racism of the Zionist movement back to the 1960s and beyond. Attacks on prominent black celebrities and activists for their anti-Semitism are not new. They have a history. In fact, there have been attacks led by Zionist groups against practically all black leaders or prominent figures of note, from Marcus Garvey in the 1930s to today. His alleged antipathy to Jews was denounced, as were a whole host of black leaders inspired by Garvey through to the 1960s. One organization key to all of these attacks, but by no means the only one, is the Anti-Defamation League, created in 1913. The full panoply of black reformists and revolutionary leaders were denounced by the ADL as extremists and Jew-baiting. The Caribbean-born psychiatrist Frantz Fanon was denounced because of his alleged hatred of Jews and the imperialist state of Israel. They also denounced Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, Eldridge Cleaver, H. Rap Brown, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Black Panther Party, Huey Newton, and Bobby Seale, and the singer Miriam Makeba. Right up to the present day, the ADL continues in denunciations of BLM. One key complaint was the black denunciations of Zionist manipulation of the anti-racist movement as far back as the 1960s were a mask for anti-Semitism. In fact, of course, Zionist penetration of the anti-racist movement has had the effect that some groups have a blind spot on Palestine. The denunciations have been accompanied by direct action. Since the 1930s, at least the Anti-Defamation League has spied on black critics of racism and have directly collaborated with the FBI and other organs of the state to attack them. In 1993, the San Francisco District Attorney investigated the ADL for collecting confidential information on nearly 10,000 activists and at least 700 organizations. The investigation showed that the ADL had directly surveilled and infiltrated social justice and human rights organizations, and its agents had received stolen police files from a surveillance program deemed illegal. The ADL even spied on anti-apartheid activists in the US and sold its intelligence to BOSS, the intelligence agency of the South African apartheid regime, as well as providing information to Mossad. For the ADL, the black-led anti-racist movement is a bigger threat to Jewish interests than the far-right and white supremacists. When Zionists complain about black anti-Semitism, they're really complaining about uppity black people, especially those who are critical of Israel and Zionism.
As always.
All right, so I'm going to again put the link to that in the show description, so you can watch the rest of it on your own. I gotta be honest. I think David Miller, Professor David Miller, is the primary interviewee. He works with that program on a regular basis and is a colleague of mine in the Organization of Propaganda Studies, and he himself has been accused of anti-Semitism and removed from the University of Bristol in the UK as a result or as part of that attack. I just don't think that I think that for that clip there, I think for what Professor Miller adds in the discussion, I think it's a valuable piece. I have to admit, I don't think my contributions are as strong as they should be. But again, I'll leave the link. I don't want to just run the whole thing. I'll leave the link in the show description. You can decide for yourself. Yeah, that was fire. That was fire. That was very well done. And in fact, so what I wanted to do is, so one of the pieces that you may have seen pop up there is one that I wanted to talk about here, because it speaks to a lot of what I have tried to argue and add to the discussion around Ye and Minister Farrakhan and the ADL and anti-Semitism. And this piece here is a very strong, helpful piece that helps us, I think, in particularly in terms of the argument I was making, add some context to why so much of the discussion as it continues to happen around Kyrie, Ye, et cetera, and so forth, is just doing nobody any favors. And despite some of the name calling I've suffered, and we talked a little bit about in the Answering Critics last time, those who do that name calling are not demonstrating any actual love or affinity or analysis for their own community. So that's, and this is partially why. So this piece here, at least this piece speaks to some of why I'm arguing that. In Jewish Currents, the anti-democratic origins of the ADL and AJC, that is the American Jewish Committee, by Amaya Gelman. The history of the ADL and AJC reveals that they were created to consolidate the power of wealthy men and stifle the grassroots left. So this is so just like I've argued in terms of Annie Zirin's piece in the history of Zionism, and as I was talking about with Dr. Roan Frazier on that series regarding Neil Gabler's work, the Jews that invented Hollywood. There's a class dynamic here and a history that people like Minister Farrakhan and many others who are in some ways rightly critical of the ADL and others leave out to the detriment of their own audiences. So just read a little bit of this. And again, I'll put the link if it's not already there in the show description so you can follow up on your own. But when the FBI raided the Anti-Defamation League's offices in 1993, the civil rights establishment was shocked. The ADL, a prominent anti-hate organization, was known for surveilling white supremacist groups and sharing intelligence with the FBI. But the raid revealed that it was also spying on organizations like the ACLU, the Anti-Klan Center for Democratic Renewal, and local Jewish peace groups, which worked against racism and for human rights. The revelation that the ADL viewed these groups as threats caused confusion for some liberals, as the New York Times put it. The organization had gone so far as to infiltrate small South African anti-apartheid committees and Arab American community groups. She continues in just talking about this at least a little bit here about how, again, the ADL and others try to present themselves as being supporters of civil rights and having marched with Dr. King. It's still noted here that last June, that is in 2021, so this would have been in 2020, the ADL refused to denounce Israel's threats to annex the West Bank. Activists protested in Brooklyn, Chicago, Boston, Atlanta, and other cities, demanding that the organization uphold its avowed democratic ideals. That same month, some celebrated when the ADL signed a letter calling Black Lives Matter the current-day civil rights movement, even though the organization remains partners with police and opposes many core positions of the BLM. AJC notably didn't sign the letter. But the ADL and AJC have never been part of Jewish resistance to power. On the contrary, they were founded to subvert Jewish grassroots organizing. Alongside the Jewish federations, the ADL and AJC were established by a wealthy German Jewish capitalist class intent on suppressing the political power of poor, often radicalized Eastern European immigrants. So again, just like we were talking about with Gabler, and his work talks about the very class of German-descended elite capitalist Jews who created Hollywood, use their position constantly in a fear against their a fear in defense of their aspirations to whiteness and imperialism. turned a lot of their hostility against their own more radicalized and non-German Eastern European folks who they looked down upon as ghetto and backwards and dangerously socialist. In accordance with the conservatism of their leadership, the institutions allied themselves only selectively with civil rights organizing, even as they labored to undermine more radical movements such as Black Power and Third World anti-colonialism, and embraced an increasingly right-wing Zionist politics in Israel, Palestine. The ADL and AJC were formed at the turn of the 20th century as a conservative effort to overshadow the organizing efforts of the immigrant working class Jewish left. The AJC was established in 1906. The ADL followed in 1913, with a heavy target, as it talks about here, being on unions. They also organized groups that is because they were working against these Eastern European Jews and increasingly radically leftist Jews who were increasingly organizing groups like the Socialist Workmen's Circle, which quickly grew bigger than the B'nai B'rith, the lodges for German-speaking Jews that had been established 60 years before. They were also inspired by the Bund in Russia, which was organizing Jewish communities in self-defense against the regime of brutal pogroms and tying its resistance to the larger socialist movements against the Tsar. So there is this rising socialist, radical, labor, leftist, Eastern European Jewish element that is worked against and suppressed by German-speaking elitist capitalist Jews who both developed, this article doesn't make this point, but both developed Hollywood and its continuing relationship to Black people and others. And they also were heavily involved in creating a right-wing force against a radical Jewish community and others, of course, but specifically creating the ADL and AJC. In the eyes of German Jews who had arrived decades earlier, many of whom had started out upper class or had risen there, this new ethnic, politically dissenting Jewishness threatened the genteel white identity they enjoyed. In response, wealthy German Jewish philanthropists founded the AJC, the ADL, and the long-dormant, recently revived American Jewish Congress, together called the Jewish Defense Organizations. And as they talk about, I might be, no, I got it right here. I got it. The ADL was created by B'nai B'rith to challenge anti-Semitic portrayals of Jews and seed positive images. But B'nai B'rith's notion of anti-Semitism was that Eastern European Jews' behavior, both déclassé and politically dissenting, was the kernel of the problem. The ADL's first president, Sigmund Livingston, argued that the first duty of American Jews was to preserve the good repute of the Jew and Judaism. And by good repute, of course, that meant we got to stay good with the Gentiles and the rich Gentiles and the capitalists. In the 1930s, as Nazis rounded up Jewish communists, the ADL denied them rather than defended them. In 1938, it issued a 30-page pamphlet declaring communism never was Jewish. Communism can never be Jewish. The ADL's mission of anti-defamation was, from the outset, also a mission to reshape U.S. Jewry as distinctly white and capitalist in orientation. But with the Cold War, the defense agencies saw both a need and an opportunity to sideline leftists. They cooperated with the right-wing anti-communist crusaders, including Roy Cohn and Senator Joseph McCarthy. Cohn, I believe, also played a role in developing Trump, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, sharing their files on politically suspect organizations inside and outside the Jewish community. As Stuart Vonkin writes in Jews Against Prejudice, in the ADL's official oral history, ADL Director Benjamin Epstein said the organization hoped to win the favor of the right-wing Hearst-owned newspapers to ensure the editorial support for U.S. aid to Israel. In the early 1950s, when Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were on trial, the defense groups denounced any suggestion that the push to convict them was motivated by anti-Semitism. Judge Kaufman, who sentenced them to death, was in fact a member of the ADL's National Civil Rights Committee at the time. That's just. And shout out to my mother. She never forgave. She always brought that stuff up. That that the Rosenbergs were Jews and of course were executed, and and my mother and her mother apparently also had a lot to say about the German Jews too. And I'm wondering, you know, because my grandmother was spied on. She was in the FBI documents. My mother's brother was snatched up. And I'm wondering if some of that animosity wasn't because they were being snitched on by folks like this. These snitches. Anyway, but she always talked about, my mother would always talk about how, like, it's these Jews and the religious ones that they always snitch and trade treacherous. Anyway, but this line here is again something that I thought ran through Neil Gabler's work as well, and I think is left out of some of this conversation. 35 years later, ADL lawyer Arnold Foster admitted in his memoir that the Jewish defense agencies were motivated more by fear than principle in supporting the executions, intent on conveying the message that Jews were not dissenters against the state. They refused to stand up for Jews who were. And that was always the point, certainly for in our household, to the extent that these issues came up. And this is a point that I think continues to get lost in all this about all this often ADL-like led anti-Ye conversation. Now, obviously, the things Ye is saying are a mess. Some of even what Chappelle, I'm more bothered by Chappelle hanging out with Elon Musk, but but my point is that whatever they're saying that deserves criticism deserves it in the context of something other than just some blanket condemnation or some empty condemnation of their anti-Semitism, because a lot of it is being driven by forces like the ADL, which has a very clear politic and goal of limiting both Jewish and everyone else's radicalism and using claims against Black people to limit Black political advance or maturity. Anyway, finally, in the mid 1950s, the Jewish defense organizations and many other Jewish groups officially purged their ranks of leftists. By then, the left, despite being a substantial force in U.S. politics, had been made vulnerable by post-war changes. Eastern European Jews had begun to suburbanize rather, and espouse a middle-class American nationalism. Leftist organizations were riven by ideological division, and anti-communist fervor had surged. Again, I think these are the conversations. And I'm glad the Jewish Currents is doing this, and I don't follow, but to whatever extent this is happening, it's not happening enough. But these are the conversations that Jews should be having more of, and more of them publicly, in discussion with their Black colleagues and comrades. If there's a serious interest in changing the way these issues are discussed and communities engage. And I'm saying I don't necessarily believe that there is, but if there is. While the ADL and AJC marched with civil rights leaders in the 1960s, they were also strengthening ties to business culture and conservative politics. High dollar giving was rewarded, that is, to these federations and charities. High dollar giving was rewarded with leadership positions only when paired with conservative politics. Controversial rabble-rousers, as a 1960s federation leader called those who did not toe the political line, were not granted access no matter how generous their donations. The rarefied leadership of the Jewish agencies and federations soon overlapped, putting all major Jewish communal infrastructure in the hands of the same small donor class. By the way, this to me says a lot about a lot of different things. For instance, this idea that you can get rich and then flip and use your money to do some sort of revolutionary act. No, because this is how the rich deal with one another. They don't care about your money as much as they care about you towing a political line, because that's ultimately what the money is for. So if you get rich and don't toe the political line, you will not stay rich, or you'll stay rich and politically ineffective. So, yeah, anyway. ADL director Nathan Polmuter would later write, I sometimes think as I visit from organization to organization, as often as not, see the same faces that we Jews invented interlocking directorate. How else would we be there enough of, how else would there be enough of us to go around? I sometimes think as I visit from organization to organization, and as often as not see the same faces that we Jews invented interlocking directorate. That's pretty deep. I thought that was interesting. And as she continues, despite the conservative leadership of Jewish institutions, many staff members, as is in the present, were drawn to the organizations out of desire to do serious work for racial justice. They infiltrated white supremacist groups and pounded the pavement to test racial housing exclusions. But the ADL and AJC were selective in their advocacy, refusing, for example, to support affirmative action. Bayard Rustin admonished in 1966, Southern Christian Leadership Conference activist Bayard Rustin admonished Jewish civil rights advocates for retreating into whiteness when civil rights demands were too challenging. If you're going to remain Jews only so long as Negroes remain nice, give it up. So I thought that was interesting, both these highlights here. One, that Bayard Rustin is presented here, who for many of us is by no means, some radical, is presented here as having, quite a radical reaction to Jews engaged in civil rights. But this idea of interlocking directorates, that through philanthropy and selective investment, it doesn't take that many people to manipulate a good amount. So I thought that was interesting. And that was in part some of the inertia that Rustin and others felt that they were coming up against, and that I think was meant to speak against even the tendency of some Jews who would enter these organizations to do something they felt was, meaningful work. In subsequent decades, Jewish institutions' politics became more overtly oppositional to the left, a stance cemented by their expanding networks of corporate and state alliances. The ADL and AJC sided against the Black-led movement for community control of schools, for example, and supported U.S. efforts to repress popular leftist movements in Central America. To manage the uncomfortable optics of their antagonism toward anti-racism and anti-imperialism, the organizations and Jewish communities turned to what historian Matthew Fry Jacobson calls the Ellis Island narrative, a self-narration centered around immigrant hardship and overcoming that deflected charges of white privilege. So again, it's the same. Anyway, let me just keep going. In the early 1960s, the ADL and AJC's alliances with the civil rights movement had created the appearance of a move to the left. Within a decade, though, their escalating corporate alliances and foreign policy making underscored the reality that they considered themselves accountable not to progressive partners, nor to rank and file staff hoping to pursue social justice, but to the values of the class that constituted the interlocking directorate. And that again summarizes so much of my own argument here that gets left out of everything. So instead of condemning the Jews or condemning or going even it's like from the super broad the Jews to the overly microcosmic ADL focus of Minister Farrakhan that I talked about before and others. What gets lost in all of this is that just like anyone wanting to be relatively successful, a segment of mostly German-descended elite Jews have aspired to ensconce themselves in whiteness and U.S. and Western imperialism to the extent that they can serve those missions. They've worked against their own communities, their own broader European communities and Jewish communities. They've worked against the rest of us. But to ignore this context is, again, I think, doing a disservice to anyone interested in making some sort of interventive change. Anyway, a little bit more here. Other dissenting organizations, including Brer, she starts talking about a new Jewish, new Jewish agenda, but a new left emerging in the 1980s. But even as they have mostly remained on the margins of Jewish political consciousness, leaving each generations of leftists to excavate the history. And what was my note here? Yeah, and this is why I was saying that Peter Rosenberg and Jordan Chariton and whoever should be talking more about this than whining about that's what I was there. That's what I was saying. Like, so in other words, she goes through, and I'll leave it for you all to read on your own, some of the history of what she considers the rise of a new Jewish left, a post COINTELPRO, post civil rights rise, 1980s. But whatever I might think about and disagree with probably her about in terms of the leftist politics of these organizations, I don't know. I do like this point here that she's making, that these leftist groups, in part because of the ADL and the conservative Jewish involvement in a conservative white media and political environment, have marginalized those histories. Just like we argue at BPM, Black radical histories are marginalized by the Black parallels to these folks. Jews have done it to one another. And that gets very little discussion. So that's why I'm saying that instead of, especially folks like Jordan Chariton and or who else was, like Glenn Green, like who are all these other folks who do not make regular or routine investigation into Black histories, experiences, the relationship between Black communities and Jews, et cetera, and so forth. Instead of making your entry point just these blanket condemnations of Kanye or Ye, add some depth to the conversation that would include and maybe work with radical Jews involved in radical organization and engagement with anti-colonial politics. This whole thing of who, relatively powerless Black celebrities being anti-Jew or anti-Semitic, it doesn't help anything. It's easy to say, when he's like, Hitler is great or whatever. Yeah, that's a mess. That's a mess. But what about anyway? So as she continues, the marginalization of the Jewish left has been a 100-year project, but even so, American Jewry has never fully conceded to the oligarchs. And in the present moment, the institutional consensus is especially fragile. In a 27, and this part right here might be the most important part of the context of this whole thing about Ye and everybody else. In a 2017 report, the ADL and the Reut Institute described the frustrating 20 times problem. They see an erosion of Israel's moral standing despite a 20-fold increase in spending to shore it up. So that's the 20 times problem. There's been a 20-fold increase in the spending to shore up defense of Israel, and it's still slipping. On the list of challenges, they identified intersectional anti-racist organizing that has successfully been able to frame the Palestinian struggle against Israel as part of the struggle of disempowered minorities, such as African Americans and the LGBTQ community, and therefore to include itself in the loose coalitions of these groups that support each other's causes. Money also can't solve the problem of the legacy organization's own diminished reputations among civil rights advocates. The Reut reports notes that Black, Muslim, and Latinx organizers no longer welcome them in coalitions. The hashtag Drop the ADL project makes this refusal more explicit. So again, the ADL is happy to have Ye run his mouth and be invited all over the place to run his mouth. They're happy to have Minister Farrakhan go out there and condemn them and turn at least half of his hour-long comments about Ye into a history reminding us about Farrakhan's engagement with the ADL. They're happy for that because all that does is allow them to go back to their funders and their fundraising and to repackage messaging about the need to defend Jews against the rise of anti-Semitism, which ultimately is meaning to defend Israel and the colonial project of the United States. The ADL and AJC have seemed more concerned with fending off calls to defund police and with implementing the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which equates criticism of Israel's government with anti-Jewish hate speech, than they are with building bridges. Again, another line that perfectly summarizes this current issue. The ADL, and that's what I'm saying, a lot of this backlash against Ye and whoever else is coming from is encouraged by a conservative Zionist political project that has no interest in building bridges with any communities or solving any problems. They're interested in only defending their imperial project. Last August, the hashtag Drop the ADL campaign published a primer on the institution's anti-left history titled "The ADL is Not an Ally." Comprehending this largely unpublicized history, they argued in an accompanying letter, which was signed by the Movement for Black Lives, Mi Gente, Empower Change, Democratic Socialists of America, Showing Up for Racial Justice, U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, and a litany of national and local groups, is key to understanding the conclusion the coalition had reached. We cannot collaborate with the ADL without betraying our movements. For these groups, forming a new vision of the present required a clear view of the past. It remains to be seen whether this reckoning makes a lasting change in public consciousness, but we can start by preventing the history from being reburied this time, end quote. So rather than beefing with the ADL or calling them out or going back and forth with them, I think it's most important to just point out that when they pop up to condemn someone like Ye or anyone else, they're only doing that to muddy the conversation and to keep us from being focused on what is actually happening here. An effort to disintegrate all forms of the left, to disintegrate in particular, and from the ADL's perspective, starting with their own fellow Jews, disintegrate and all those radicals and those who won't toe the line and the rabble rousers, and get rid of them and couch it as defending Israel, defending Jews, defending against hate. Meanwhile, they have a well-documented history, that is the ADL, of siding with the most right-wing conservative policies and projects of the United States, all working again to block radical political organization. So yeah. Anyway, that was it. That's it. I just thought that stuff was fascinating, and wanted to share that, and I don't know, in some way interrupt this interruption. So that's it, everybody. Thank you very much. Tomorrow, that is, as I said, no World Cup live here. Going to spend that time with baby girl. Looking forward to that. But I will be back Monday, and we have what I'm going to, for now call the Mumia crew is coming back to talk with us at length about the very fascinating decision from Judge Lucretia Williams yesterday. We didn't talk about it on my show yesterday, but we will cover it on Monday in great detail. So please definitely come back and make sure you spread the word about that. And do all the things to help support this show and this channel. And thank you very much. Is this new? Yeah, this is new. Like, this is happening right now. And there was a quite interesting developments on Friday, if you missed it, that we'll cover very much in detail on Monday. It's almost like I said, good news. Thank you, Big Teal. I appreciate that. Definitely appreciate that. Appreciate that too, James. Yeah, it's looking bad out here. But anyway. And yeah, Emma, there you go. Congratulations. Happy days for you. glad I could give you some good news. Anyway, thanks everybody. I will catch you Monday morning. As Fred Hampton used to say to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. Catch you Monday. Peace.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.